Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. Glad to see we've got quite a few people here today. Looking forward to, we'll be going through, obviously, as you guys are all hopefully aware, we're going to be doing a technical deep dive into the HPE SimpliVity hyperconverged solution. My name is Dave Kluger. I'm the CTO at Storcom, and with me we have Lance Hagert, who is a solutions architect specialist at HPE, and James Kohlbeck, who is also a senior solution architect at HPE. And they will be presenting a lot of the information today. To get started here, we're going to go just real quickly. Today's agenda is I'm going to go over a quick brief history of kind of our background with HCI and kind of where we saw the market going with the evolution of hyperconverged solutions. Then we're also then going to go into the HPE SimpliVity overview. And then, as we said, we'll be doing a technical deep dive and demo. And then there's a Yeti cooler giveaway at the end. So with that said, we'll get started here, and just kind of a background on at least Storcom's history, as well as just the history in general of HCI. Back in 2013 is really where the market really started to move towards hyperconverged solutions. Hyperscale computing had been around for quite some time. Facebook, Google, all of the big players in that space have been using this type of technology, which is basically a distributed architecture of compute and storage, but it typically required large data center environments, a specialized kind of hardware platform, as well as the kind of talent to manage that. So the HCI market was born out of those concepts and trying to bring them into the open systems market and into the enterprise space that most corporations and organizations are working in, and that have been typically using a legacy stack. So we started looking at these technologies to figure out how they could basically help our customers and the challenges that they were faced with. So back in 2013, we started evaluating this. We looked at Nutanix, we worked with SimpliVity, we also tested with technologies like Maxta and early vSAN technologies. And at that point, we had selected SimpliVity. We felt it was the most mature and the best solution on the market. We were the first reseller here in the Midwest. We did some of the first deals in 2016, one of the largest SimpliVity deployments to date we had done with a client here in the Chicagoland region. In 2017, you'll see that HPE purchases SimpliVity because they want their technology to bring into their portfolio. And we continue to grow and grow with that, what HPE was doing, and also technologies like what's called RapidDR is a technology that bolts on to what SimpliVity does inherently within its own solution and orchestrates this whole process. We were one of the first resellers and integrators to work with that technology. And now we're basically in 2020 where we're watching, continue to watch where HPE evolves with this technology and brings in things like Infosight, which Lance and James will be going into. And that's kind of where we are today. Again, just a quick brief background. As I said, you have what we would have all called the legacy stack, three-tiered architecture with storage, compute, and networking. And then along comes Converge 1.0, which is solutions where basically it was a pre-integrated solution. It was basically a predefined architecture using storage and compute and networking that was all basically had been tested, but it really wasn't conversion. Really, what it isn't a converged solution. It's just basically a pre-certified solution that has all of the cabling and all of the components to draw all that together. And with that, you see the kind of from there kind of grows into what we call Converge 2.0, which is where we are starting to see some of that getting collapsed into a converged solution where there's more integration into the hypervisor. There's more integration between the storage and compute stacks and the backend network. But that typically at that point was really being kind of pushed towards VDI and tier 2 and tier 3 environments because it really wasn't kind of production ready. And then along comes SimpliVity, really at the forefront of Converge 3.0, which is basically an open system platform built on x86, true hyperconverged, which is, as we said, and then James and Lance will be getting into the concepts behind basically distributed computing and distributed storage, and that's kind of where really the market then now evolves into a true hyperconverged environment, which all the solutions today on the market for the most part fall into that realm of providing those capabilities. Lance and James are going to get into what separates the HPE solution apart. And the last step of this kind of evolution is Converge 4.0, which is where we start to see hyperconverged on-prem, and where components of that are allowing us to leverage things like the public cloud or building out a private cloud, containers, Kubernetes, all the concepts that are basically being used within the public cloud are now being collapsed down into hyperconverged solutions to make it more manageable and easier to deploy, rapidly deploy new applications. So that's kind of a quick, overview of where HCI has come from. I'm going to turn it over to Lance at this point. He's going to go over and explain kind of HCI and from an HPE standpoint and where they're at in the market.
Appreciate it, Dave. Thanks. I think, adding on to what Dave built a foundation on, I think this is a nice transition. The maturity of hyperconverged has significantly skyrocketed, throughout the last 4 years, and looking into, the future here. As you can see, not only is it a huge market that a lot of people are looking at, but whether you appreciate what Gartner predicts or whether you're a fan of other analysts, the message is clear. Dave hit on this in a general statement, but workloads are shifting, from general VDI to general purpose workloads. A lot of people are putting on mission critical systems, whether that's driven by ERP, Microsoft solutions, SQL, things like that. A huge driver for Hewlett Packard Enterprise in the way our technology work is the key acceleration in remote and branch offices. No longer do you need a IT person to be able to manage those out in those facilities, or most so the challenge was not having an IT person to be able to handle those IT related responsibilities in these robo sites. And along with that is the constant growth around the edge as well. And those are some things that Hewlett Packard Enterprise has been focused on for quite some time. As most of you know, we're just not a hyperconverged vendor. We are a global IT enterprise provider. And from there, the bottom line is that our clients, our prospective clients, are all looking for a way to modernize and consolidate things, to do things in a much more efficient manner. And these are all going to continue to drive growth in the marketplace itself. So, why does Gartner look at Hewlett Packard Enterprise and SimpliVity, as a strong go-to-market partner to consider? Bottom line, end of story is that we have been around for a long, long time, through HPE, through our separation of Hewlett Packard Enterprise 5 years ago. We're a global financial stable company, and we're very strong with a comprehensive portfolio. And while we'd like to think for your virtualized workloads, SimpliVity is probably a pretty good fit to consider, there's other solutions out there that can address other things such as bare metal, strong growth in regards to your storage capacity, different things in regards to being able to broker out to Microsoft Azure as an example. But really, along with our partnership with Storcom, we understand, what you're trying to achieve. And through our collaboration efforts, we really tried to position the right technology or technologies for consideration as you align those for your project scopes. Once again, I touched this on the previous slide, but according to Gartner, once again from an HPE perspective, consolidation, business critical systems, edge, VDI, and remote and branch offices is why we were ranked top 3 of 5 of the 6 use cases on this HCI report. And common theme here, once again, organizations must have a increased simplified environment that is efficient and agile to be able to manage. And as we all know, with the uncertainties of different strategies from working at home, different strategies for our healthcare providers, different strategies for corporations that have to monitor people coming in with the pandemic going on right now, this is a prime case of where SimpliVity is helping, along with our breadth of portfolio of Hewlett Packard Enterprise, to help these organizations with these challenges. Top use cases, where does this fit? I hit on these indirectly, but every day, multiple times a day, James and I are talking about data center consolidation. Typically, it's a server refresh or a storage refresh, and a lot of times other, manufacturers don't have a seamless solution that includes backup, recovery, and DR, which we have as part of our solution set as well around the data protection side. I addressed Edge and Robo. VDI has become even more increasingly popular because of the reasons I just mentioned, and then really having a need for mixed workloads internal to their virtualized environments. So these are 6 of our top use cases when we're working with clients. And as I mentioned, usually it starts with a discussion around data center consolidation and data protection, and then morphs out to edge and remote and branch offices and holistic approaches around test and dev and mixed workloads. Just an independent analysis in regards to what our clients are running on SimpliVity. I won't run through all these, but everybody pretty much has some sort of Microsoft application that's in there. But I do want to call out the second one, industry-specific applications. So whether that's 911 call centers, whether that's healthcare applications, whether that's CAD/CAM applications, K through 12 applications and higher ed, those things are specifically being utilized on a regular basis on the SimpliVity platform. And as you can see, it's just not one application, and it's many here that people are utilizing our platform for their virtualized environments. So the folks on the phone, I really don't know everyone's background, but talking to administrators, directors, C-level organizations on a regular basis, it really comes down to some of these 4 pressuring items that every VMware administrator has to deal with it, whether they like it or not, until they look at a better strategy, in our opinion. Infrastructure is just becoming more complex. Dave showed you the evolution of traditional architecture, all those pieces, all those parts, all that firmware, and everything you have to manage to optimize your virtualization environment. Constant firefighting and uncontrolled VMware sprawl. So once somebody understands, hey, it's pretty easy for me to get VMware spun up for my applications. Constantly, our administrators are getting barraged with requests on a regular basis. And from the top down, you have to lower your costs. It's a requirement to efficiently utilize your assets and being able to scale that. And that's one of the things that we really think is unique with SimpliVity, to provide you with a foundation, the building block, potentially a phased-in approach to be able to scale this globally across your organizations if needed, or maybe one of your sites or cross campus as well on a smaller scale. And the bottom line is supporting traditional architecture and applications, and then also people being mandated of a cloud-first objective, but really not understanding if their applications are ready for cloud, if they're secure, what's the give and take. So there's a lot of things that people have to deal with on a regular basis that keeps them from proactively doing things more strategic. So what's in SimpliVity? So an all-in-one system. Dave showed you how we collapse those stacks, removing the silos and built-in resiliency and backup and disaster recovery. We'll get into a little bit more here with James. Easy to use. Anybody who knows how to use VMware and vCenter, it's a global unified management. Literally, it is a one-click, three-click command to create, replicate, recover volumes. And James will show you that in the demonstration in itself. And a lot of times, people are concerned of, how hard is this to upgrade? I need to have my firmware in line with my VMware firmware and my OS and my hypervisors. The maturity of SimpliVity and our one-click upgrades, that makes that process that much easier for you when it's time to upgrade. Zero time downtime from a refresh cycle perspective. Being able to add nodes non-disruptively, take them down for maintenance, being able to replicate them back and forth. Some of the value of SimpliVity to help you with that constant uptime that you're required to have for your users. Automation and tuning, we'll get into this a little bit more, but there's a lot of things that we do inherently to SimpliVity, and with the maturity of Infosight being rolled across the majority of all HPE data center products, those are some things that are helping our customers from a customer experience perspective as well. And added value is predictive analytics and support automation. Majority of our customers do not like to sit on level one, level two support. Talk about firmware, talk about logs, send me the versions you're on. We capture all that information proactively, because when and if you have an issue, we're able to triage that situation and own that from cradle to grave for you. Some other things in regards to Infosight, being able to make sure that you have the ability to be able to have 90 days worth of insight into your top consumers of your virtual machines inherently into SimpliVity. Gives you multi-site view of all the VMs and backups with efficiencies and savings on a dashboard that's easy to monitor and easy to read. And then also from a case automation perspective, being able to create cases on your behalf, being able to give you a notification, however you may want to receive that, and just make sure that you know and you have the confidence that you have another layer of eyes and ears watching your system, that we can help you out. And so often, if a drive fails, our customers don't even know it because they're not sitting in their data center 24/7. Next thing they know, they get a notification that a drive's arriving for them, and we're asking if you want us to install it or if you want to do it yourself. So the power of Infosight continues to grow on the SimpliVity platform. Taking a look at some of the things that we do differently is around built-in backup recovery and disaster recovery. Everything that we talk about within our solution set is part of the investment that you make in SimpliVity. As an example, you're able to do backup, you're able to do replication, you're able to do failover, you're able to do failback, and you're able to do those things without a third-party traditional software, as an example. A lot of our customers shrink their costs of their backup software and their application stack because we can do a lot of these things into SimpliVity in a real-time fashion. But also, we fully understand that there's long-term archiving, and in the past that had been a challenge for SimpliVity. Before, over the last year, we've incorporated what we call our deep archiving or air gap archiving with our HPE Store Once appliance. So that can be an appliance itself. It can be a VSA software that you can put on storage itself, so you can reutilize assets as well. So being able to have the power of instantaneous backups to the point that it takes 10 or 15 seconds to recover a 1 terabyte volume, should you have that unfortunate incident of getting attacked by ransomware. And we have a guarantee that it will take 60 seconds or less to be able to do that for you. And as you see James's portion of how the technology works, I hope that you will fully understand, what the cost efficiencies are going to be because of the things that we do things differently than traditional stacks. So really, when we have a conversation, it's about VMware, it's about helping that administrator in the business, but it's really around the total cost of ownership and what that ROI is back to the business. In my opinion, one of the most aggressive timelines out in the HCI marketplace. So, why hyperconvergence? Why now? Hopefully some of the things that Dave talked about, some of the things that I've talked about, are resonating a little bit if you're in an inflection point where you have to take a look at servers and storage, and, you look at backup as a nightmare. Being able to pull these things into a nice, easy to manage footprint, being able to, handle multi-cloud initiatives if you're going in that direction. Being able to optimize your resources and eliminating that guessing game, meaning specifically with SimpliVity, at inception, everything is inlined and deduped. So that's one of the major reasons that we can get a lot of the total cost of ownership down with our technologies. And being able to do that alleviates, some of the other HCI solutions. Do I turn on compression? Do I turn on deduplication? Okay, if I do these things, what's the repercussion? Well, typically it's more storage that you have to have, or it's more memory that you have to build up because it's taxing your processors. None of that is an issue with SimpliVity because of the way that we handle the data. And bottom line, lower cost. It's going to give you the ability to reduce your devices. Average, storage efficiency is 47:1, and really gives you the ability to streamline a lot of that legacy IT gear into an easy managed type of solution. So a lot of people say, okay, great, Lance, you guys talk a big game, you talk about all these great efficiencies. Well, one of the things that we also do is provide a guarantee. So James will talk about how we have these efficiencies and how we support these guarantees, but it's just not a marketing slide, okay? You know, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that sell on marketing information. A lot of times people buy something based on that salesperson's you know, commitment verbally, but when it comes down to it, they're having issues, and usually the tax to the customer is buy more to make that problem go away. We guarantee it. So, you know, if you have an existing 3-tier architecture and you decide to put your backup and your primary storage on SimpliVity, we guarantee a 90% capacity savings. I already touched on this indirectly, but we guarantee that we can recover a local 1 terabyte volume in 60 seconds or less. Why is that important? One of the reasons I told you is with the you know, constant barrage of crypto locker, ransomware, and attacks that are malicious against our organizations. Easy and simple to manage, 3-click backup, restore, and move and clone, and being able to create multiple thousands of backup policies in under a minute. And you'll see how that works in James's as well. And then being able to add, you know, SimpliVity systems without zero downtime and the traditional things that you have to do this after hours, bring systems down, make sure you don't have users, test it out, bring it back up in the reverse order, you know, cross your fingers, and then once it's all ready to go over a long weekend, then you open it up to your users. Those days are gone for our SimpliVity users. So I will pass that over, and while I'm doing so, I will ask if there's any questions that I can address on my portion right now.
Hi guys, a question came in, and somebody wanted to know whether or not SimpliVity allows for file level recovery.
James, you want to touch on that quick?
Yes, it does. So actually part of the demo, you'll see where you get the option to do a full VM crash consistent backup and restore, or you can do file level recovery as well. So what that does is it actually mounts a ISO to a CD-ROM into any one of the VMs. And then you can open up that VMDK file and kind of pick and choose the file and folder that you want to bring back across the network. So good question.
Right. James, I'll pass it to you. I get you.
Okay, let me know when you can see my screen.
Somebody else just asked if there was a trial version available.
A trial version available in regards to a try and buy, or it? I guess I don't understand the question, but you know, typically what we do is if there is interest, part of our methodology is going through the demonstration process that James will show you. In addition to that, we also encourage people who are evaluating SimpliVity to you know, work on it themselves. In addition to that, you know, we also have access into labs that you guys and gals could access to you know, do a pseudo proof of concept. And if there is, you know, a specific you know, use case with criteria, absolutely, we would do evaluation systems based on a collaboration with Storcom.
And another question came in asking if SimpliVity can be a part of GreenLake.
It is part of GreenLake. Right now, it is more of a enterprise type of play where it makes you know, financial sense. It is where it gets into, you know, probably, you know, the 100 terabyte plus range. You know, it's creeping towards, you know, half a petabyte because there's a lot of other items that are wrapped into the GreenLake offering. But absolutely, it can be provided as GreenLake. And what we are also working on is a GreenLake Swift offering. I should know the acronym, but I don't. But the Swift program is coming down the stack, you know, being able to align with, you know, mid-sized businesses and even SMB businesses to take the advantage of the operational GreenLake experience, but also being able to have a palatable, you know, subscription model basis as well. Great questions. Keep them coming. All right, James, I can see your screen. Heidi, any more questions at all for us?
No questions right now. You guys are all good.
All right, we'll keep going, James.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to do more of a technical deep dive of pretty much everything that Lance just presented as far as what SimpliVity can do, and then we're going to follow it up with a short demo and kind of show you how this all works with inside of the hypervisor of VMware as well. So as a part of this, we're going to talk about the data virtualization platform layer. Okay, so this is specifically around SimpliVity and how we handle the data as it comes in. So if you look at this, this is specifically to a host. The host has, in this example, 4 VMs up in the hypervisor, and then we have the persistent storage down below. Okay, so this could be SSD or hybrid. We'll kind of touch on the portfolio at the end of this presentation so that you can see where we're at across the HPE portfolio as a whole. But really what we want to show you here is the data virtualization platform layer and those 2 virtual layers of the presentation and the data management layer, okay? So the presentation layer is going to be the emulation of storage back into the hypervisor data store, okay? So much like what VMware did decades ago as far as taking cores and physical sockets and making vCPUs, virtual CPUs back to the VMs. Same idea with memory back to virtual memory and emulating that back into a virtual environment. SimpliVity took that one step further, and we're doing that with storage as well. So what that means to you is really no LUN shares or volumes to manage as a part of the solution. Commonly, our customers have just a couple data stores. You don't have to worry about loss of performance if you have more VMs with inside the data store, because it's truly all running from the persistent storage that's down below. Okay, and then the data management layer is going to be our deduplication and our compression, or our efficiency layer. So as it comes back into the data virtualization platform layer, it's determined in there if it already has the data at an 8K block size. So if it already has it, it does not have to write it again. If it doesn't have it, it writes it down to the persistent storage. So let's kind of walk through this here a little bit. Very first data write from that first VM, you'll see everything's registered up in the data virtualization platform layer, then only the unique data is written down to disk. Same for VM2 and VM3. Now, as soon as we get that first deduplicated write, right, comes down into the data management layer, determines it already has it at an 8K block size, so it does not have to write it down to disk. Same idea on the next deduplicated write from VM3. So this really gives you twofold as far as what you're getting for a return on investment, right? So Lance talked a lot about our guarantees as far as data efficiency, especially when you include our backups as a part of the overall solution. When you're looking at this data virtualization platform layer, what it's doing is it's determining that it already has the data and only writing the unique data at an 8K block size. So you're getting a very high level of efficiency with inside of the solution. And on top of that, a return on investment with performance as well, which I'll deep dive in the next slide. But if you kind of walk through this, a lot of this is staying within the bus, within the chassis of each of the hosts when it's doing just the reads, right? So it doesn't have to go across a fiber network or an iSCSI network to grab data and bring it back. So your read IOPS are very, very highly available, and the performance obviously equals that as well. So if we go through a common storage IO pattern in a traditional environment, right? Commonly what we're seeing with many of our customers when we do our data pulls are going to be about 25 to 30% of the actual IOPS that are being used are going to be the actual application or workloads. From that point, many times you have to size around your management utilities as well as your hypervisor utilities, okay? So many of our customers that use a third-party backup solution, especially when they're in traditional, they usually go to a third-party backup solution. Many of those are using snapshotting architecture with inside of VMware. If you think about that, what that does is it actually creates a swap file, right, within the VM folder. It writes all the new data while you're actually taking a backup of that pristine VMDK file, and writes it back in once it's finished, right? So it's a lot of moving motions as far as, creating brand new data, pushing that back in. When I was a customer, I actually ran many different stacks of this with Commvault, with EMC Avamar, and it just seemed like not all of those the snapshots would actually go in and be healthy, right? And you'd have snapshots out there for days, weeks, and months. running separate with inside of your environment, which means lower performance as well. But think about the IOPS portion of this, the IO, as far as what it's doing with that on every single VM. So that's why many of our customers, what they're doing is after-hour backups, or they're doing during the weekends. Not very often are you doing them during the day, because you want to keep that full amount of performance back to the application stack during that time frame. The same idea is really around mirroring as well. So when you're mirroring with inside of the overall environment, you're reading and writing between multiple locations. So if one-to-one, one-to-many type of idea, replicating data between data sources and so forth. And all of that is going across the WAN at a very high rate with reads and writes, determining what it has to send across to protect your data for full business continuity. Snapshotting, we already talked about that, where that's being played, and then the workloads. So the difference with SimpliVity is we can actually create an inline deduped VM copy that's already 100%. So there's zero IO to actually create that logical VM copy, okay? What that means is the data is already there. It's already part of the solution. It's with inside of the workloads on that persistent storage. So all we're writing is metadata back to the VM saying, we need to hold on to this, these 8K blocks for X amount of time, whatever your retention periods are. We'll show you this in the demo, but these policies are very easy to create using the SimpliVity snap-in into VMware. And this is why we can actually do backups within seconds and restores within seconds, because it's just realigning those data blocks into a new name. So that's completely eliminated, that backup IO that many of our traditional environments have to adhere to. When we're doing mirroring between locations, remote mirroring from site to site, this is actually a global deduplicated product that we provide with SimpliVity. So what that means is each site knows what's at the other site. If we do a one-to-one and we're doing a disaster recovery type scenario, every time that we run a backup, it's going to use that metadata. It's going to already know it has X amount of blocks over there. Here's the change blocks that we have to send, and we're going to send those over at an 8K block size. So these, gigs, 900 gigs, a terabyte worth of data that is part of the VM, we're only going to send the change blocks that could not be deduped and compressed across the wire as a part of that. So that's really our WAN effectiveness as well, WAN acceleration within the product that's built in. Snapshotting, because we can actually do local snapshot, we can actually do local backups and restores within seconds. Many of our customers no longer leverage snapshotting, right? I mean, it's something that's actually built into SimpliVity, so you could leverage VMware snapshotting if you wanted to and keep the VM up and running. But let's say you're doing an update, say you're doing Windows updates or something like that, and you're doing some testing, you go ahead and you back up the VM within seconds, you restore it within seconds if there's an issue, and you're no worse than you were before. So mostly obsolete with inside of the SimpliVity environment. And then because of everything that we talked about in the previous slide, that compression, deduplication, everything staying within the chassis of the host itself, right? As far as the reads, only having to write down the new blocks, we're seeing a large amount of performance increases that across the board with SimpliVity, where about 50% of our customers are seeing, half of their data actually being able to be put back towards the performance on the data sets as well. So if you look at the full environment of what you would use inside of your environment as far as IOPS compared to what SimpliVity is, there's your return on investment with performance, as well as the return on investment with storage. So this is always a big question with HCI, right? How resilient is this? How available is this as a part of the solution? I told you I came from the customer end as well that used SimpliVity. This was a big differentiator for us using SimpliVity over any of the other options as far as HCI because of how it protected the data. So many of you are, I'm sure, are aware of RAID technology, redundant array of independent disk. RAID technology is redundant array of independent nodes. So really what that means is fault tolerance across your cluster using multiple hosts, okay? So in this scenario, what we're seeing is 4 hosts inside of the same cluster, and it's using just RAID technology. So this is what many of our competitors do as far as protection of this. So you'll hear terms such as FTT2, FTT3. That's really how many times they stripe the data across the host within inside of the cluster, okay? So the problem with that is if you actually lost a drive in one of the hosts inside the cluster and lost a second drive in another host, if that data lived in both of those locations across your two FTT2 situation, you could have data unavailability or data loss, okay? Same thing if you have a node down for maintenance purposes or you're doing upgrades inside of your environment. If you lost a drive during that time frame before it rewrote everything that was on that primary host, you could have data unavailability or data loss as well. So thinking about that, how much protection is being sent across, just a RAIN architecture within inside of your environment? On top of that, how much is the network being used to keep that data in sync with multiple paths? So commonly when we're going up against, other competitors, normally they have to put in a 5-node solution to get the same type of resiliency that we can do with SimpliVity with 2. So with SimpliVity, the difference is we're actually doing RAIN plus RAID across the board, okay? So that means we can actually lose up to 2 drives on any one host in a parity 2 RAID 6 type situation. So that's per host that we're providing RAID technology. And then on top of that, we have our primary and secondary copy that's always in sync. So the data, the deduped data across the board is being in sync across other hosts within inside of your cluster. So you could lose a full node and still keep everything up and running during that time frame. VMs would just get up and move over to the other host inside of your environment, or you do a standard vMotion to do so. So very, very resilient, 24/7, 365 type scenarios. You don't want to have to worry about dropping 2 different drives in 2 different hosts and then losing or having data unavailable. So it really brings you to that enterprise-based level as far as resiliency with SimpliVity. Doing more with less. We just talked about, what we could do as far as the amount of hosts within inside of the cluster. You get full HA, full high availability with 2 hosts or more with both storage and CPU and memory. So let's kind of start with where you're at today in a traditional environment. This is just 4 common hosts going through fiber or iSCSI network back to a storage controller of some sort, and your VM data lives in the primary storage. Secondary copy is usually on some type of device where it creates a secondary copy into a backup appliance or to a different storage unit. First thing we're going to do is replace those upfront ESXi hosts with DL380s, DL325s, anything in the portfolio, right? So if we keep it to that level, memory, CPU, what we're doing with these boxes is we can go anywhere from, in the Cascade Lake processors, we can go from 1x8s all the way up to 2x28s, so 56 core per box, and we can go up to 3 terabytes worth of memory per box as well. Once we introduce that data virtualization platform layer, create these as SimpliVity boxes, right? That's where that platform layer is really doing the same idea of what your normal storage controllers would do inside of your environment, okay? So as the data comes in, it's going to come through the DVP and it's going to determine if it has to write it, and it's going to align it according to the VMs and the metadata that's already in there. So as soon as we migrate the data off the primary storage to the SimpliVity storage, that's where you get your RAIN technology. Primary copies, secondary copies of your VMs always in sync. And it only has to sync the data that hasn't been deduped or compressed, so the change blocks. So there's not a lot of east-west traffic that happens between these hosts as far as the writes, because much of that stays with inside of the chassis because of the efficiency. And then finally, as we incorporate the backup solution with this as well, you're going to get a primary and secondary copies of the backups as well. So constantly in sync with inside of your environment. And that's why with the amount of resources that we can provide, along with the amount of data efficiency we can provide, what we're looking at is, really compressing the nodes, especially for smaller organizations. We're looking at a 2-node production cluster, full HA this gives you across your locations. And you also are able to bring down nodes for maintenance purposes or for updates and stay up and running without any performance hits. Once we push this out to more of a multiple site, multiple tenant type situation, here's a very easy disaster recovery scenario, right? You have your full HA inside of site 1. Secondary site has just a 1 node replication target that has enough resources to actually bring up all of your data within inside of that one location. So many of our K through 12 type scenarios, what they have is fast fiber between site A to site B in high school to middle school. They might do something like this where they do a primary site with production, and then they just put like a hybrid node over in disaster recovery and replicate the data there with the amount of resources needed. Replication can go back and forth between these sites. This is what's called the SimpliVity Federation. This is all within inside of the vCenter in either linked mode or single vCenter type environments. Adding to your overall environment to grab high availability within the secondary site is available too. So like Lance touched on, no downtime to add to your environment to add more resources as far as the appliances itself. And there's multiple different ways of actually doing this. So let's say we started with 1 socket systems. We could actually provide just a second socket and do an in-place upgrade to give you more horsepower. Let's say we started with 6 DIMMs per socket. We can continue to add memory to these enclosures as well without having to add a whole nother appliance into your infrastructure as well. And then actually with SimpliVity, we have another option that's called compute nodes. So compute nodes is where we're actually adding a like type CPU family box, right? So if you got Intel, we're going to throw in an Intel, say DL360 with this, connect that back through the 10 gig network, back into your SimpliVity host. And then SimpliVity is really being used as storage controllers at that point, but it gives you a way of actually pushing more CPU and memory into your cluster without adding a whole nother SimpliVity host with the storage, right? The storage is already there. In fact, when we do a lot of the architecting as far as VDI equipment, normally, there's a high level of CPU and memory that needs to be used there, but a really low level of storage that needs to be used because it dedupes and compresses so well. So normally our VDI infrastructure actually includes compute nodes with that as well. As you can continue to branch this out inside of robo sites, you could have high availability sites, you could have one single site depending on the workloads. Everything can be replicated back to a data center object or data center location within inside of the same federation, right? So multiple sites all being able to back up each other and bring up the servers as a part of the disaster recovery hub spoke design. Talked a little bit about the SimpliVity product family already, but this is really where we're at today, and then also including what Lance already spoke of the store once device for that air gap type of backup. So when HPE acquired SimpliVity, what they did was they put that on their standard DL380 model. Everything was hardware accelerated, which means that it actually had an FPGA card as a part of that. That's over there on the left. What HPE did was they actually extended the different model types. So if you look at the usable capacity, this is before dedupe and compression, anywhere from 3 terabytes per node all the way up to 32 terabytes per node. And then we talked about the CPU and memory that you're able to do with this. The most recent ones in the last year and a half, we started pushing this into more of a optimized, software optimized type situation, right? So we have the DL380s and the 380Gs. It's really the same base model, except for we're taking that hardware accelerator card in for those smaller general purpose type situations. This is where you can add multiple VDI GPU cards, 1 proc NIC connectivity, expandable PCI throughout, because we're actually taking that 2 height card out and then opening that up with inside of the riser boards as well. So go up to all the way up to 3 terabytes with these guys, and then the different t-shirt sizes you can see there, 7.5 up to 20 terabyte. And I've been told just recently we're going to do times 24 in there as well, which is going to be around 30 terabytes of usable space to complement the hardware accelerators as well. Different types of hybrid approaches. So we got small form factor, large form factor. Biggest difference there really on the small form factor is that's going to be more general purpose for lower IOPS. It's going to have 10Ks on the back end, but also a supplement of SSDs for caching. So this can be used for more of those mixed workloads and so forth in general purpose. The large form factor drives, you get about 25 terabyte in that guy, but on the back end, the spinners are 7.2Ks. So, really meant more for long-term archive and backup services or disaster recovery in a low performance type situation if you have to bring it up. So those are different hybrid models that we provide as well. And then just recently, the 325 was introduced. So if you know the nomenclature for HPE, the zeros are Intel's, the fives are AMD. Those 325s, entry level, very cost effective, especially for these smaller locations, robo locations, small data centers. They got two different model types of 4.6 and 7.5 usable before dedupe and compression. We recently introduced the Rome second generation processors to these, and now we can go anywhere from the 1x16s all the way up to 1x64s as far as the core counts. So these have really taken off just recently inside of the environment, and you're not paying that Intel tax as far as the server itself. So really great placement for those smaller locations. So that's everything I have for the presentation. I'm gonna bring up the demo site here real quick, but see if there's any questions.
Hi guys, there is a question. It's asked, many other HCI solutions claim to have DRBC built into them, but it seems more like they're bolt-on applications. So is your solution different in that way?
Yes, absolutely, it is different in that way. And I'll just re-emphasize what I mentioned before. Inherently built into the SimpliVity platform, not only do you have primary storage for your virtualization environment, you have backup, you have replication, and you have true business continuity functionality without any additional bolt-on applications, software, hardware, etc. There is one, or actually two additional items that people consider that are add-on licenses. Dave Kluger mentioned that on the onset in his session. We have an application called RapidDR. So if people are familiar with VMware Site Recovery Manager, SRM, Zerto, things like that, we have same functionality that allows you to automate and orchestrate your priority of your VMs, allowing you to start them up in regards to a failure, what deems appropriate for you in your business. And then, an additional license that we have, a whopping $250 list, is data encryption at rest. So those are the only two additional items that you would ever have to pay for on a SimpliVity solution. Everything else is included with the cost of the investment. Great question, thanks.
Another question just came in asking, for the DRBC scenario with only one SimpliVity node at site 2, what's the maximum amount of data that the node can have on the storage device?
A lot, but James, you want to say a technical answer?
Yeah, so this really kind of depends on what your efficiency ratios are on the data workloads, right, specifically. But if you look at the usable storage, the largest amount of usable per node is going to be 30 terabytes before dedupe and compression. If you do a very low end as far as that dedupe and compression, that effective storage is anywhere from 60 to 90 terabytes effective capacity after dedupe and compression. Good question though.
Yep. And just to add on that quick, and I'll let you jump in to the demo, it is if you have the connectivity, James referenced a lot of our K through 12 school districts and city municipalities. A lot of our users are doing a stretch cluster, so they will take one node and put it in campus A, put the second node in campus B, so they have that separation in regards to those two. So you have, in essence, two active data centers. So a lot of different methodologies when it comes down to how we can provide you the most robust solution that you need for your business requirements. But we also have options, understanding that sometimes people don't have the need for two active data centers. All right, okay. James, I'll let you jump in.
We have two more questions for you. The first is, let's say your primary and DR site both get hit by a natural disaster. Is there a cloud solution offered utilizing SimpliVity to replicate your data to another region?
Yes, so the answer is yes. You can utilize any cloud provider that you want today, but coming here in the near future, we will have the inherent benefits of SimpliVity. Specifically, what I mean by that, as an example, is as a reminder, everything is deduped and compressed at inception. Now with the store once air gap backups, we also have the ability to keep that in its deduped and compressed state. And then in the very near future, that will also be able to stay in its deduped and compressed state out to, the cloud provider of your choice. Today, you can do that, utilizing a Veeam, using Commvault, Veritas, whatever, but you have to, hydrate and rehydrate the data as it goes through the wire. So the answer is yes, and more to come in the next 90 days that all those benefits that we've been talking about will be inherent in that transport to and from the cloud.
Thank you for that. The last question is, how often do updates occur for the product?
James, I'll let you address that. From a business side, we are enhancing typically our portfolio every 90 days in regards to software enhancements and new features and functionality. But James, do you want to answer that a little bit more from a technical perspective, and maybe just how you would manage your large environment when you were an end user?
Yeah, and that's pretty accurate. So the next revisions of each of the software for SimpliVity usually comes out every 90 days, so 4 times a year. Commonly, the way that I kind of work with my customers on this is we never go to the latest and greatest unless that feature set is needed during the time frame, right? We're always one back, and we usually do it twice a year as far as the full update. So that way you can kind of keep up with your ESXi environment, you can keep up with your SimpliVity environment at the same time, and keep in mind with SimpliVity and the update manager, everything is orchestrated now. So you're able to actually do your updates of your firmware, of your CPU, or of your host itself, of ESXi, and of your SimpliVity software, all within the same management console at this point. So makes it very easy, where it moves the VMs back and forth using vMotion for you automatically, shuts down the virtual controllers for you, updates the machines for you, and then comes back up and moves on to the next one. So, but to answer your question, 90 days they come out. Normally, most of our customers do it twice a year.
Looks like we're good on questions for right now, but you guys have an opportunity to ask some more, so keep them coming.
Great.
Okay, awesome. So this is the vSphere client. This is 6.7 HTML5. We're just going to kind of show you how this works with inside of the hypervisor, right? Very simple to include this. So this is also already inside of your vCenter. What we're showing here is, a vCenter in Dallas and Melbourne that are actually in linked mode. You don't necessarily need that with SimpliVity. It does gives you another layer of high availability with 2 vCenters, and and that's across the board with whatever you guys choose as far as your disaster recovery. To be able to link mode your vCenters will help out with any disasters. But definitely is supported with just a 1 vCenter connection as well. What we're doing is we're just including a web client or an API that ropes right into what you're already using inside of your vCenter. So that's going to give you like this HPE SimpliVity Federation underneath the menu and a few options up in that location. If we go down to the host and clusters, you go to the cluster itself. If you right click on the local cluster, you'll see the SimpliVity actions there with different options, and then all the way down to the VMware and host level as well. So just kind of depends on where you're at in the vCenter currently to be able to get different options as far as what HPE can snap into. So we're going to start up here in the menu. I'm going to just kind of show you how these performance how the storage actually looks as far as the efficiency inside the dashboard. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go down to the cluster space here. We're going to go into our local cluster. This is a 4-node in Dallas. The total amount of physical space, usable space before dedupe and compression is 10.5 terabyte. Knowing the sizes, I know that these are 4 extra smalls at about 2.5 each. So 4 of those will accumulate to 10.5 before dedupe and compression. The use space is actually after dedupe and compression, how much storage it's actually using with all the backups and all the VMs running with inside of there, along with replication as well from the Melbourne site. So if we deep dive the details a little bit further here, and we take a look at our efficiency, this would be logical space is like the raw storage, right? So if you had full backups, you're using the same policies as what we're using here in the demo rig, you would need 268 terabytes worth of storage to hold on to all the backups that we have total in the local backup solution. The remote backups is providing 128 terabytes of raw storage, and then the virtual machines is around 6 terabytes of storage, okay? That accumulates to 403 terabytes. What we're doing is, because of the deduplication algorithm of that 8K block size, along with utilizing the same storage, we're getting 96.3 to 1 as far as the efficiency ratios. Real-time, like real-world experiences, I managed 15 different clusters across the US with SimpliVity. We're anywhere from 30 to 1 all the way up to 120 to 1. And the 120 to 1 was DR shared disaster recovery nodes from multiple locations back to the same data center. So once it started looking at that data, a lot of that data was very similar coming from different locations. So it even gave a higher level of efficiency. We've seen VDI actually go up to 200, 300 to 1 as a part of the solution, as a part of it as well. So if you do the total math here, 96.3 to 1 out of 403, we're actually using only 4.19 terabytes total of the physical space. So that's the efficiency and how that runs with inside of SimpliVity. So let's show kind of some of the disaster recovery and data mobility processes here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this VM. It's a 500 gig VM. I'm going to go down and I'm going to do clone of a virtual machine. I'm going to rename this guy. Making it crash consistent. So it's going to do a full clone of the 508. But remember, this is all 8K block deduped environment. So all it's doing is realigning those blocks underneath a different name. And once I turn this up and new data starts coming in, it's going to be adding to that new metadata tree for 00JK. Same idea as far as the backups, right? So if I do a backup of a virtual machine, I do a remote cluster to protect it over in the secondary site. Let's push this out about 4 or 5 days for retention. Hit next and finish. You'll see it being queued down here, backup SimpliVity. And what it's doing during this process is, remember, it's all global deduped, right? So it's looking at this VM, it's looking at the data that it already has in that location, and it's only going to send the change blocks from the data that it has according to what it has in site A. As far as the local backup, if we do a backup here, do a local backup, let's push this out a month or so. Next and finish. And you'll see that running locally as well. Now remember, according to the presentation, what we showed was there's no overhead, right? So we won't see performance hits as a part of this local backup because the data is already there. All we're doing is writing metadata back to the VM, and we're holding on to that metadata tree, saying I need to hold on to these 8K blocks for X amount of time. In this case, is about 3 weeks. Go into SimpliVity Actions, and we search those backups currently. Here's the 2 backups that we just took. Completely protected, 508 gig of that. The 19 megabits that was actually sent is the change blocks for this VM from local cluster to remote cluster. Took about 30 seconds to send total. So let's invoke a disaster here. If we do a delete from disk, hit yes. VM is no longer available. Local cluster, no longer available. We'll go into Melbourne and actually do a disaster recovery restore. So we're going to search the backups over in this cluster. Backup actions, we're going to do restore virtual machine. I'm going to restore it here in the secondary site. And this at this time can be renamed if needed. I'm going to name it the same thing for DNS purposes. And you hit close and you'll see what's going on here, recovering a VM from a backup that has been deleted. And we're going to re-register that VM in the remote cluster in Melbourne, 508 gigs worth of data. So now Dallas is back up and running, so we want to move the data back over. And again, with the rapid DR process that we talked about, all of this can be orchestrated as well, where you don't even need to go into the solution to actually do it. You can actually just hit a couple buttons once you have it pre-configured, and this will all do this as part of the backup scenario and disaster recovery scenario for you. But we can do a simple move, right? Move of a virtual machine back to a different data store, and we're going to push it back to Dallas. We're going to hit OK here. And really what it's doing here is everything that I just did manually. So a backup local, then a backup remote, it's determining those change blocks, what I have to send over there. Then it's actually going to pick it up and move it for you. So it's going to unregister the VM, and then it's going to re-register the VM into the other cluster for you as well. I actually used this in my previous life for data management, data mobility projects to move out of co-locations. So we had a site that was in Texas. We had two 100 meg connections that gave us about 90 milliseconds of latency up to Wisconsin. During that time frame, we had about 140 VMs to move and over 40 terabytes worth of data. So what we did was we worked with the application owners and we'd move application by application. We actually, when we were ready, we shut down the VMs, we did the final backup, and then we did the move of the VM. And just to give you some idea, SharePoint, 11 VMs, 5.5 terabytes worth, SQL, web front ends, application, none of that really mattered because it's moving the data storage that on the back end, that persistent storage from one cluster to another in a very deduped environment, right? So we're able to move full workloads, full VMs within 5 to 7 minutes, getting that over to the other location. At that point, we had to change IP addresses and DNS, hand it back to the application owners, have them test, and we'd move on to the next one. But planning for this was 6 to 8 months worth of planning. It took less than 8 hours to actually perform all of that with the DNS IP addresses changes across the infrastructure as well. So you can see as we were talking, that got moved back into the local cluster over here, and now we can actually power this guy up and run it like it was in the past. So if you think about everything I just did, right? I did a clone local, I did a backup local, a backup remote, I did a restore remote, and I moved that guy back, and that was all within about 7 or 8 minutes here. So we have a lot more to show you. We are up against the hour, but hopefully this perks some interest as far as what SimpliVity can do and really shows you, the management behind it and how easy it is to use with inside of the vCenter that you guys are already used to. So any other questions?
One question came in asking if you think that SimpliVity's dedupe and compression rates are on the conservative side.
So when it deals with just the VM data, as far as VMs and backups, what we're seeing here is pretty legit. That 90 to 1, having more than, when you include more than a month or 6 weeks worth of backups on dailies, that's pretty legit as far as what we're seeing. The 10 to 1 guarantee that Lance talked about, obviously, our lawyers know what we can and can't do with this. So we're guaranteeing 10 to 1 as long as you include the VMs with the backups and get that high level of deduplication and compression. So kind of depends on, the workload and so forth. But like I said, I manage 15 different clusters. We're anywhere from 30 to 1 to 120 to 1, depending on the workload. Any other questions?
No more as of right now.
Excellent. Well, before you do your drawing, I just wanted to say on behalf of HPE, thanks for the opportunity, Storcom team, to allow us to give you this overview in an hour session. I would strongly encourage you, if there is any interest whatsoever, reach out to your Storcom sales representatives, and they can definitely engage with us. If you want any additional information, YouTube is a wonderful thing, so just search SimpliVity. And I believe that Storcom will probably also be following up with you as well. So thanks on behalf of the HPE team. Heidi, I'll let you do the fun part.
Yes, it's now time for the Yeti cooler giveaway, and I did the drawing while you were presenting. So the winner is Steve Kaiser. So I will be reaching out to you shortly to get your address, and congratulations. And on behalf of the Storcom team, we thank you for your attendance. And if you have any questions, please reach out to any of us. Thanks.